You're listening to Southern Miss Radio. It's time for News You Need. News You Need is a look at current events and how they affect the college community and beyond. News You Need is sponsored by USM Partners for the Arts. And now here's the host of News You Need, Dr. Ed Simpson.
Hi, everyone, and welcome back to another and final exciting edition of News You Need. And Cinnamon is frowning. She's joining our panel today. So this is the last show of the semester. This is the show where we talk about what our USM students think about what's in the news and what they're consuming about what's in the news. And the reason we care, of course, one final time for this semester is because news is the weather report for your society. It's the idea of you know what issues are coming at you as a citizen, and so you can make decisions about what those things mean to you and what you want your community to do about them. And the best way to know about those things is to read the news. So that's why we're here. We talk about what's going on in the news. We do have a special theme today where I would like to keep the conversation. We'll see how it goes, but I want to keep the conversation with the idea of all of these legislative attacks, governor attacks across the country on diversity, equity, and inclusion programs on college campuses, and that is directly related to the student experience. So I'd like to ask our students about those kinds of things going on. So, but first, let's introduce ourselves, and I want to talk a little bit about your connection to student groups. Cinnamon, you want to start?
Sure. So my name is Cinnamon Lee. I'm a senior communication studies major, social media content and strategy minor from McGee, Mississippi. A couple of student groups I'm a part of on campus is the student tour guides of the Office of Admissions. I am a member of I work with the Student Media Center. I'm a producer for this podcast.
Absolutely.
And then I've also just been involved in orientation, things of that nature. Anything dealing with giving student tours and facilitating high school students events and stuff like that.
Yeah, and one thing that makes me super happy, although you may not want to talk about it yet, you're going to be working with a new podcast up at Old Miss. Are you allowed to talk about that?
Yes, I still don't know all of what it is. We don't have a name or anything like that, but it is something they're trying to start this upcoming year. So that'll be a task I'm handed as a GA up there.
Yeah, that's great because you were also the very first producer for this show. So you're used to starting things up there. I love that. Bailey, tell us about you.
Okay, my name is Bailey Broom. I'm a senior public relations and advertising major, about to graduate, and I work in the Student Media Center as the strategic communications student director, and I'm a part of the Lucky Day program, and yeah.
all kinds of stuff. Yeah. All of our students are so involved. It's just great. Jalen, what do you got going on?
All right. Okay. So first off, happy to be here. My name is Jalen Jones. I'm a sophomore English major who's also in the Honors College. One of the main things I do is that I'm the secretary for the Southern Miss Association of Black Journalists, but I'm also involved with other on-campus organizations generally into equality and equity, and also my field of study, English. I'm vice president of Sigma Tau Delta, the English Honor Society, VP of Students for Human Rights, and also president of the Greater Brain Club.
Wow, so you wear a lot of hats.
Yeah.
And this issue is actually right up your alley is what it sounds like. So tell me a little bit, what's SMBJ up to? Are they doing anything here at the end of the year that our audience needs to know about, or?
Not currently. Only thing we've got planned right now is just the end of the year dinner for our exec members, which happens later today. Actually, we're just gonna go out to a restaurant and eat. But
cool.
Definitely keep us on your radar for next year. We've got some cool, interesting projects coming up. We have our podcast / interview series, Speak On It, where we talk to local figures on campus and ask them their opinions on goings on and things of note, such as what you guys do here.
Yeah.
And then we just generally have programs related to Black journalism, its significance, and also connecting that to the student body and the Black community here.
I love that. That is absolutely awesome. Okay, well, so guys, I know this is slightly off topic, although it kind of isn't. Is anybody watching what's going on this weekend with King Charles? Do you guys care?
He does have his coronation.
He has his coronation. And do you care?
I know. It's cool to be a part of history, I guess, but it's just I think it loses its whole big deal when people are when there are a lot of poor people are kind of starving and they're doing this extravagant thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have heard that, is that the taxpayers over in Great Britain are paying for this very elaborate party for a 73-year-old who is going to be king for the first time. But a lot of folks are still talking about what the monarchy represents in terms of colonialism, institutional racism, and that whole thing, and the idea of why are we still celebrating this? Does that come up in your circles? Have you guys talked about that issue at all?
Definitely for me. I remember when Queen Elizabeth first died. This came up with like my group of friends and also quite a few people. It's just the idea that a lot of people were like actively mourning her and the passing of her in relation to monarchy. And it's just very interesting because, you know, the British Empire is responsible for all these different things. A lot of the things we struggle with now, institutional racism, colonialism, imperialism, most of the world and the global population has issues with the British monarchy as opposed to, you know, weeping when we lose them.
Yeah, I remember CNN did a tremendous piece in Jamaica where they could not find anybody upset over the Queen's death, and I suspect they are not celebrating in Jamaica this weekend either. And I hear you guys are not. You're not going to pop a beer to old King Charles, no?
I probably watched like
Not for
I think pictures and stuff,
Just-
like just to see it.
Yeah, whatever. Yeah, I hear you. Okay, well, speaking of imperialistic colonial type operations, the Kentucky Derby is running this weekend. Does anybody care? Do you care?
Okay, I heard about the Kentucky Derby. Like, I heard that like 3 horses died or something. before.
Yeah.
Like,
Okay.
That's the only reason I know about it.
Oh, interesting.
Oh, no.
Interesting. So did you hear about the horses?
No.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't know
So
this
in the
was going
last couple of weeks in the run-up to the Derby, 3 horses have died. And so now they're opening an inquiry into, okay, how do these horses die? And are you guys obviously abusing animals?
Mm-hmm.
So interesting, you guys don't care. I'm feeling it.
I mean, I
Feeling
care
it.
for the horses,
Yeah.
but
The
I
horse,
mean,
the horse, yeah.
not big into the derby situation.
I couldn't tell you what it was at.
No.
Yeah. Well, that's another. The Derby is another one that has a long history of institutional racism, all kinds of things. So there's a lot of folks looking at those kinds of things, which does take us to our main theme today. So this is. I've just pulled some headlines across the country, really, and then I want to talk a little bit about Mississippi. But on Chronicle.com, so this is what I do. I have my route that I run every morning to get what's going on in the news. And one of the places I visit every morning is Chronicle.com, which is the main publication for higher education. So about 6 months ago, they started what they're calling the DEI Tracker. So what they're doing is they're just keeping track of all of the bills in legislatures across the country that have been introduced to somehow curb, cut back, or eliminate DEI programs on college campuses. So this is what, as of yesterday, these are the numbers. 34 bills have been introduced in 20 states, and so far 3 have passed. Now it does take quite a while for bills to pass. 1 has been signed into a law. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a break here in a second, and we will pick up with some thoughts about the DEI tracker and what's going on across the country on the other side.
Have you lost your right to vote due to a criminal conviction? 1 in 10 people in Mississippi are unable to vote because of a felony conviction. In 2020, Mississippi had the 2nd highest incarceration rate in the country, with members of the Black community making up 60% of those who can't vote. But there are organizations fighting back. One Voice and Mississippi Votes are committed to helping people regain their voting rights. Call 1-888-601-8683 to take your power back.
This message is sponsored by One Voice, Mississippi Votes, the Mississippi Association of Broadcasters, and this station.
Hey Southern Miss Radio, this is Charlie Luttrell from the 4th Street Sports Show, a student sports radio show and podcast covering everything going on in Southern Miss athletics. Our group is back this year to keep the coverage going and bring you a fresh perspective on your favorite teams. If you want to catch up on all the sports events and hear from the players and coaches themselves, then make sure to tune in to Southern Miss Radio 88.5 every Monday at 5 p.m.
Okay, we are back, and we were just talking about the Chronicle.com's DEI tracker. 34 bills in 20 states. 3 have passed. 1 has actually been signed into law by a governor, and only 5 so far has failed. Now, how Chronicle.com defines this is tracking legislation. The Chronicle is tracking legislation that would prohibit colleges from having diversity, equity, and inclusion offices or staff, ban mandatory diversity training, prohibit institutions from using diversity statements in hiring, or prohibit colleges from using race, sex, color, ethnicity, or national origin in admissions or employment. This all comes from model legislation. So this is how these kinds of things work, right? Is there are institutes, usually in DC or New York or someplace, that say, hey, here's what a model piece of legislation would look like if you want to tackle this issue. So those are the four main prongs of this model legislation. So talk to me about this idea of state legislatures trying to cut back or end DEI programs in higher ed. What do you think?
You go first.
Okay. Well, this is actually something that I kind of focused on in some of my journalistic work. I specifically looked at like political legislation created by, typically pushed by the conservative or alt-right parties in an effort to basically reach a sort of political agenda. That specifically, I feel like a lot of these bills are coming because they're trying to appeal to the GOP voters and, get these sort of diversity, equity, and inclusion programs and policies out on the basis of them being unnecessary. Specifically, Ronald DeSantis, talking about he wants to review funding for DEI programs across the state, and how Mississippi is also taking inspiration from that. And the idea here is that we don't need these programs, but it's just the fact that these programs increase admissions and also make things more equitable and diverse in a variety of ways. And by appealing to their voter demographic, they're alienating people who are more middle of the road and centrist, and also harming teachers, students, and people at large.
Yeah, so you're against it.
Yeah, definitely.
Thoughts?
Yeah, pretty much what he said. It's just like, whenever I saw what they were doing down in Florida, I was just like, are they really being serious? I don't see, any type of common sense in it. It's just nothing but, like people said, just to appeal to their voter base. And you don't accomplish anything from doing that. And but higher education, I can understand, states having, a say in how public schools work, high schools, middle school, and elementary. But with higher education, that should be just left up to the individual. The government shouldn't have that much of a hand, pass laws like that, because we all know what we want to learn. We all know what we want to have access to. And, taking away those programs is going to cause more harm than good, because at the end of the day, the people who don't want to be a part of, diversity, equity, inclusion, programming and stuff, they can just choose not to. And then that just leaves, if they pass stuff like that, it just leaves people who actually do genuinely want to learn about it, need something like that to fit in, leaving them nowhere to go, leaving them stranded. Because that's pretty much besides sororities and fraternities, which is mostly white, white students, men and women, offices like that cover diversity, equity, inclusion is the only thing left for people of color, minorities, and things of that nature. And so you take that away, and where do we have access to?
Well, yeah.
Yeah, and on that, I think that if you're taking away these DEI programs, you're also taking away people that are able to hold others accountable for their actions. And I've also seen the work that we of the places that we have on campus, the Office of Inclusion and Multicultural Engagement, and seen all the great work that they do and the support that they bring to their students and faculty. So if you don't have that, then what are you going to do?
Yeah, it feels very much like 1954.
Yeah.
Very different.
It really does. And I've brought this up on the show before, but this idea that after Brown versus Board of Education, a series of states, and Mississippi was actually the leader in that movement, passed a series of legislative acts to actually fight integration.
Yeah.
Because and the argument, very interesting, was wrapped in this idea of not racial issues, but states' rights.
Yeah.
And does that ring a bell with anybody who studied the Civil War, right?
Yeah.
This isn't a racial issue. This is about states' rights. And so it feels very much like the clock has turned back. And for someone like me who's been around for a while, now you guys, I'd love to hear your thoughts on it, because for me, what I have seen is that society is generally pretty awful, but there has been what Martin Luther King described as an arc that bends toward justice, right? And so, you kind of feel like, okay, yeah, there's been some really ugly incidents, and we step back every now and then, but generally society moves forward. It feels like we've stopped that forward progress.
Very stagnant right now.
Yeah.
I was like thinking, like just about like different areas in history, or like during like the the Holocaust, and how like a person like Hitler, how was he even able to like come to power? Like, how do you just spread that ideology? And I'm sure people back then thought like, oh, it's just words. It's nothing's gonna come of it. And then now I'm starting to think like, what is going to happen because of this if nobody stops him? Like, if it just bills like keep passing like this. I mean, if something like that can pass, what else could happen? And because at first I was just like, oh, whatever, it's not going to pass. Like, it's like obviously right there, like that's very like, very like racist kind of. And so it's not going to pass. But then I'm like this is really gaining traction. Like, people are really like supporting this, and so I'm really just what's going to happen,
Yeah, in the past year, we've seen like the clock like turning back, basically, with women's rights too. Like, it's just they're trying to take it away from all like minorities and everyone.
Well, that's right. So Roe v. Wade, nobody really thought Roe v. Wade would be overturned. And of course, there's been a lot of good work done. If you go back and look at the Supreme Court justices' confirmation hearings, each one of them were asked directly, would you vote to overturn Roe? Each one of them said that is established law. Well, so there we go. So now, would there a case? Now, there was a lot of people thought on the Fox News defamation suit with Dominion voting machines that would go up to the Supreme Court, and they would use that to overturn Times v. Sullivan. That's the libel. Remember that? You should remember that from your law class. Looking at Bailey, she goes, "Well, I kind of remember that. I sort of remember that."
Sorry, Dr. Martin.
Sorry, Dr. Martin. But that's the law that established your current media environment. That if you're a politician, you have to prove malice in order to win a libel case. So there was a lot of thought that would go up to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court would overturn Times. Now, is there a movement to overturn Brown versus Board and say, okay, that's a state's issue?
It definitely seems like, and I mean, you can stop me if I get too political.
No, you go right ahead.
It seems like a big proponent of this political strategy is what people are typically calling waging a culture war. They're finding issues that don't necessarily exist, creating a sort of fervor about them, and playing on the unconscious and existing or the explicit biases of people in their voter base to try to exacerbate them, and then use smaller issues and like appealing to them emotionally as a route to get greater and more significant legislation passed. I mean, even with this DEI attack, you can see that Ronald DeSantis, who's like I guess the model for this, he's the poster boy of stripping away rights right now. In Florida, you can see that he started with the CRT bans that people took inspiration from nationwide, and they were targeting CRT in K through 12 public education, which CRT isn't being taught to kindergartners. That's just not something that's really happening. But they convinced people that that was a real issue. And then from there, we're now going from there to attacking higher education, trying to ban CRT there, and then also diversity, equity, and inclusion. Basically just scrub the history books clean of any mention of anything relating to marginalized groups at all.
Yeah, I mean, it's, so CRT is critical race theory. And of course, we could talk all day. We could talk all day about that. But so Florida is taking the lead in this, although Mississippi is not far behind. So one of the things that I'm looking over here at my notes here. So one of the things that happened in Florida was that the state has taken over the New College of Florida. That's what it's called, the New College of Florida. Yeah. And they've taken it over. So the governor came in, stripped the Board of Trustees, and installed his own Board of Trustees. Well, they remember that. So this is the idea that all of these lib colleges out there, we're going to have a conservative college. which is not unheard of. There's Liberty University. There's other examples of conservative universities that students go to, but they did take one of their first actions last week, which is they voted against tenure for 6 professors. You saw that?
Yeah, I heard that.
Yeah. So, and then that kind of leads me to the idea of Trump, former President Trump, came out with his position on higher education last week. He's running for president again, and he and DeSantis are likely the number one or the most likely to face off in the GOP nomination process. So his position is he wants to strip any sort of DEI from higher education, and he wants to do it through dismantling the current accreditors for universities and put in his own accrediting bodies. So your university, USM, is accredited by a group that says, yep, you're providing a good education. You guys don't have to agree with that, but there's an outside body that said, yeah, USM is doing a good job, you're accredited. And Trump wants to do away with that body and impose his own body. And what he says is some of his rhetoric is really kind of interesting. And it goes toward this idea of any sort of classes or majors or programs that would deal with race would be disallowed.
That's a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, even like one thing that comes to mind is even just like NPHC organizations, like black fraternity sororities, like those are technically like.
Well, that's an interesting thought.
Like those technically would fall under that, I think. So
yeah.
that's,
But
like,
wouldn't white fraternities and sororities fall under that too, or not? I mean, let's say so the argument is, now this is the argument from the conservative side. Mm-hmm. They say, listen, we're not anti-black. This is not racial. We want to take race out of it, of everything. So if you do that, I mean, is that a reasonable position?
No.
Well, okay, so why isn't it a reasonable position?
I'm really glad you asked, because, well, first off, I wanted to say, like, one of the reasons why they're attacking these accrediting organizations is because when your entire platform is based on stripping away rights and bigotry and stoking the flames of that, the idea of accredited universities promoting systemic change and supporting diversity and equality, that's terrifying, because you want everyone to think that those ideas are unfounded. But if your major educational institutions are promoting those ideas, how are you going to do that? So that's why they're going for this. And the thing you said about, we're taking race out of it, is that reasonable? It's not, because one of the main things people talk about, especially in critical race theory, is the idea that based on someone's marginalized identity to believe their race, people's experiences within this country are different because of systemic factors. People often talk about the black-white wealth and achievement and education gap, and that education gap exists because for years and years and years, you had schools that were underfunded, schools that did not receive the proper amount of attention, did not receive materials, that were terrorized in their communities that black children were funneled into. They resisted integration for so long, and then there's also just the fact that, it's the basis of systemic racism. Basically, it's just that you can't take race out of it because race is real.
If you strip race out, you're left with white.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
That's it, because they're the only people who hasn't been affected by anything like involving like race, like is what the white people. And I think another issue too, if you like take out race out of everything like that, is that you're really taking away the chance for people to gain empathy for other people.
Okay, we are going to take one more break. I'm getting a nod from our engineer, and we're going to actually pick up with this fascinating discussion about institutional racism on the other side.
Midtown Merchants Association, the Forest County Board of Supervisors, and Southern Miss Radio presents the free event, Midtown Sounds 23, Saturday, May 6th at Southern Station on USM's campus, featuring Mississippi native Paul Thorne. Midtown Sounds 23 with Tupelo's own Paul Thorne, Saturday, May 6th at Southern Station on the USM campus, presented by Midtown Merchants Association, Forest County Board of Supervisors, and sponsored in part by Southern Miss Radio. Since 1927, the Student Prince has been a direct conduit to USM students. Get your share of the more than $600 million USM brings into South Mississippi by advertising your business or service in the Student Prints. To find out more about how to advertise in the Student Prints, email sm2sales@usm.edu.
Okay, we are back and talking about this concept of institutionalized racism, right? So if you strip out the concept of DEI, which is a focus on creating diversity, equity, and inclusion, and you strip out that, well, what you're left with are these white legacy institutions, white legacy policies and laws that privilege whiteness, right? As opposed to trying to equalize the playing field through DEI programs. So it's kind of interesting. So in Mississippi, there is lots of discussion, especially from the governor's office, about doing the same kinds of things here. And how would that make you all, as our students, how would that make you all feel about your Mississippi universities and colleges if your state government were to say, done with DEI stuff?
I'd head for the hills.
Would you really?
Yeah, I'd go to Canada. Because like that also specifically affects me as a member of the Southern Miss Association of Black Journalists, because that is an organization for Black students, specifically focused on like how we're underrepresented in news and the media, and how that's like really, really important in regards to like overall equality, having proper representation in the media field and being able to discuss that. And also I'm a Black Studies minor. That's like part of the material I cover here in my education and what I plan to go into in the future. So if I couldn't do that, then I just think that would be ridiculous.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I would be very disappointed, honestly. And also, with this taking away these programs, you're also going to be taking away jobs and taking away the support again. And I mean, I don't know. I think it would not be good.
Yeah, I'd be very disappointed, but it wouldn't shock me because it is Mississippi. But I do think, like, at that point, I would probably, like, just truly, like, consider, like, it's been something I've been thinking about, since I'm kind of entering that next phase of life and stuff. It's like, where do I want to live, post, like, graduation? And, like, every day I try to find a reason to stay, because Mississippi, like, it does have potential, but I don't see, like, a good future for me or, like, a future family, like, raising them here in Mississippi.
Cinnamon, your comments should give chills to anybody in authority in this state, right? Because you are, you're an honor student. You have a 3.8, if I remember, GPA. You're going into grad school. You're doing all kinds of great things. You are the young person we want to stay in Mississippi, right? But yet our politics, our policies, where we're headed is our policies and where we're headed telling our young people, you're not welcome here. We want to live in 1954.
And I hate that it's like that, because then it's going to only be certain states who are like kind of like, I don't want to say safe zones, but like not everybody would be able to have like access to be able to just move and go to like states where it's not like not as brutal here.
Yeah. Wow. So this has been an amazing show. We are going to wrap it up. So thank you. I don't want to leave on a bummer, but it's kind of a bummer of a topic. So that's okay. Thank you very much to our guest today. Great show. I think we couldn't end the school year on a better note. So thank you, Cinnamon, our producer who has kept us between the ditches all year. Shania Williams, our engineer, thank you. Special thanks to Dr. Brent Hale, who was the guest host last week while I was out in Chicago doing strange things for accreditation. And we hope we will be back in the fall. We're going to determine that here in the next couple of weeks. Thanks for being with us.